Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This video is all about preventing and managing blossom end rot on your tomato plants. Other plants do get that, but we typically see it on our tomato plants. Now, blossom end rot is a physiological disease. It's not a virus, fungus, bacteria. It happens because your plant's not able to get enough calcium into its system. And what that does is when there's a calcium shortage, so to speak, it looks a little bit like this. This isn't quite blossom end rot, but just imagine a full brown circle, black circle right under here on the bottom of your tomato. That's the sign that you have blossom end rot. And that's because the tomato plant's not able to pull calcium into the tomato and it begins to suffer. So it is a calcium issue, but it's primarily caused when you don't water your plants properly, and that happens most often in your containers. You can have plenty of calcium in your container mix. I'm going to show you how to set it up so that you know you have calcium in your soil. And then you have it in your containers, but you let it dry out. The root systems get damaged. They can't pull in the calcium that's available, and that causes blossom end rot. A couple of things to keep in mind. When you're growing in earth beds, there's usually plenty of calcium, but you can also do this when you're setting up your tomato beds or your vegetable beds. And they typically don't run into that issue of watering inconsistency because the roots go deep into the earth. They got enough moisture, they use the calcium that's available. So a lot of times you see it show up on your containers. So what do? So when you're preparing your container mix, you can add in garden lime. That will change the pH of your soil if you use a lot of it, but don't worry, a handful thrown in your container or a sprinkle isn't going to matter. You can use bone meal, that's high in calcium, and you can also use gypsum. Gypsum is calcium sulfate, I believe. It doesn't change the pH of your soil. So if you have soil that already has a high pH out in your garden, you may want to use gypsum so that you don't increase the pH level or raise the pH level. I like to use wood ash that has 25% calcium in there. And what you're doing is you're putting in that calcium in the beginning of the year into your containers, you know it's there, and then you're lightly sprinkle it into your garden, usually in spring or late fall, to let you know that the calcium's there. Then we'll talk about watering. So bone meal, in something like this, I'll put in about 3 handfuls. I'm going to use all the products. I'm not going to put 3 into here. But in a container that size, you know, a 5-gallon container like this, I would just mix a handful of bone meal into this container. I'd put about 3 into here. So the next thing I would do is maybe you have lime. Lime is fine to use. It's calcium carbonate. Same thing, I would put, this got a little bit wet, I would put 3 handfuls into something this size, or maybe about this much into, you know, a 5-gallon container like that, mix it through. Just sprinkle it in. Or I would use potash. Now, people are always concerned that you're going to really change the pH. You're going to lower the acidity, raise the pH when you're using lime, sometimes bone meal, and potash. You will if you put in tons of it, but again, about this much into a container that size, this size, and you would just sprinkle it through. Just mix that through. You have 3 ways to put calcium into there: wood ash, garden lime, bone meal. 4th way would be gypsum. Mix it through. You know that you have calcium. Again, blossom end rot is really going to show up in your containers. Now, the reason that happens, we set this up with lime. We put it in there, we have calcium in there, we have put in potash or bone meal. Bottom line, we have plenty of calcium in our containers. When the plants get larger, and you can see that they're producing fruit, these are peppers of course, tomatoes, squash, zucchini, they suck the life out of the soil. So it is possible that your plants with the massive root systems, great growth, take the calcium out of your containers. So you can add in some more calcium if you see a problem with blossom end rot. And I usually do that by taking a handful of lime, mixing it into a gallon of water, kind of make a slurry, feed the plant. That lets you know the calcium is there. But usually the issue is at some point the watering wasn't consistent, The plant root systems are drying out. They're getting larger as the plant gets bigger. Damage to the root systems mean they can't take care of the upper growth, the tomatoes, and then you get blossom end rot. So the real key is consistent watering. You have to maintain the watering in your container plants to prevent blossom end rot. All the stuff we do to prep is just so that we mentally know that calcium is present. I would do something similar to this right over the surface of my tomato plants planted in the earth beds and the raised beds, and I just let the rain over the fall, winter wash the calcium in there. But I know that it's present, and it's present in the soil. And it's much more predominant, blossom end rot is much more predominant in containers for the reasons of root systems dry out, and they suck the life out of the soil, and they could possibly use up the calcium that's in there. Luckily, calcium is not like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You don't need a ton of it, you just need a little bit. So just keep that in mind. But if you want to prevent your tomato plants from getting blossom end rot, set your soil up with some calcium in the beginning. Don't overdo it, but maintain the watering. If these plants dry out just one time, it's going to damage the root system, it's going to damage the physiology of the plant, and most likely your tomato plants will get blossom end rot. Thanks for watching, and please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com, and please subscribe. I'll show you how I grow and take care of this entire garden.